What are your main goals at UACC? I guess briefly.
Um, this is what I'm going to say is probably not written down anywhere, but it's my elevator speech. We're concerned about recognition and inclusion. That's pretty much the agenda of any marginalized group that forms a social movement. They want to be recognized. Take the gay rights organizations, for example. They want to be recognized and they want to be included in decision making. Both those have to do with having some kind of voice and some kind of power. But if you're not recognized or included in anything, and an example of inclusion, the mayor of Cincinnati a few years ago formed a child poverty group. Mm-hmm. And we had to insist and kind of lobby to get included in that. And we did. That's an example of inclusion. We wanted the Appalachian voice. You know, we're one of the, probably the majority of poor people in the greater Cincinnati area are of Appalachian origin. For us to be left out of the the mayor's child poverty group would have been intolerable.
Right.
Now, I can tell you that was rather token, and that we had to, you know, we still have to keep fighting to be really recognized and included. But we did get included, and that's what I mean by inclusion.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. What I've noticed too is it's not just exclusion, it's also I've never given too much thought about Appalachia until I've taken this course, and once I've taken the course I find it really interesting, and I just never given it much thought before. I feel like a lot of people outside of Appalachia don't think too hard into it, and then once you start to learn about all these things about the coal mines and then the amount of suffering that the people in the region went through, it's like a lot of people outside the region aren't too well informed on it. So it's good that there are groups like yours to kind of make sure that they're being included and the history is being learned and all that sort of thing.
People wanted to say, this is still on the topic of inclusion, I guess. Even some of the down home leaders and spokespersons, when J.D. Vance wrote his book, instead of recognizing him as someone trying to be a spokesman for urban Appalachians, which is a legitimate population group, mm-hmm. They denied him any kind of Appalachian identity. And that was just, even though these were progressive people, they were not progressive on that point, you know.
Yeah.
Anybody who really understands who Appalachian people are knows that 2/3 of every Appalachian family lives in Cincinnati or Detroit or Chicago or Baltimore or somewhere. And to deny Appalachian identity to those who have left the region or even their children or grandchildren is wrong. Whoever does it. I feel good about it in a sense right now because Berea College just awarded me their annual service, Appalachian Service Award. And that was a recognition that urban Appalachians are Appalachians too, and that Mike Maloney's worked with people who've left the region and their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, but that's legitimate. So that's what our movement, the urban Appalachian movement, is really about, is being recognized by our own people down home. You know, they need to claim us. Right now, if you have left Appalachia and you go back and try to get a job, you may be excluded from local employment because you left, and that was an act of betrayal. Well, that's a kind of prejudice and exclusion and marginalization that we shouldn't be doing to each other. You know.
It's kind of funny, but it's really not. So yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that'll work into one of the other questions I'll ask. One of the other questions I had was who's Appalachian, sorry. Who is Appalachian and how do you find Appalachia and why? So I guess you kind of worked into who is Appalachian. Some people view it as if you leave the region, you're less of an Appalachian. And how do you define who is Appalachian?
Okay, when I talk to students, I usually give two definitions. First is a technical, actionable definition, and for that, I say that an Appalachian is anybody born in the 420 county Appalachian region that was designated by the Appalachian Development Act of 1965 as amended. It currently includes 420 counties. It's been amended over the years. If a school superintendent, for example, wanted to count Appalachians in his school system, that's the operational definition that he would use, or she. Then there's a cultural definition, and my cultural definition is anyone who shares the culture that developed in the Appalachian region from the time of settlement to now. And expanding on that, that could include the children of the Rockefeller, who was governor of West Virginia, even though he wasn't born there. His children were. And his wife was named Sharon. I think she was in Illinois or somewhere. I don't know. I don't even remember that Governor Rockefeller's name, but at one time there was 2 or 3 Rockefellers who were governors of states. I think they had Florida, Arkansas, and West Virginia or something, or at least the first 2 of those. So
like a little dynasty then.
So the cultural definition, I am willing to include people who have moved there, who were not born there, but who just adopted into the culture. Native Americans used to have a way of adopting people into the tribe. They would also expel people. And so I'm using a very old concept. Phil Obermiller, who's another scholar, for a long time didn't know that he had ancestry in an Appalachian county. But I've always considered him one of us because he kind of adopted in and, as far as I'm concerned, became part of the community. So I think any ethnic or racial group needs to have ways to adopt people in and perhaps expel them. I think maybe J.D. Vance is up for expulsion, not because it was his grandparents who left Kentucky, he wasn't born there, but but maybe we've got reasons to expel him. We don't have a formal process for that, but maybe we should.
Right. It's kind of just like a court of public opinion.
Right.
It's pretty funny. Okay.
So I deliberately added some humor there, but you get the idea that there's the technical definition. You have to have an actionable, more objective definition, and the ARC definition works for that, but you also need a softer, more subjective definition.
Right.
And the people who refuse that that kind of flexibility that I've described in my cultural definition, I call them purists.
Hmm.
And you see that, for example, Native Americans really protect the designation because they, rights and property and all kinds of things are involved. So they and a lot of white Americans falsely claim that they're Native Americans.
Yeah.
And it's romantic, it's whatever, but so they fight that. But also it can be tough, if you are part Native American and you've experienced some marginalization because of that. Some people, really have to fight for their legal claim to Native American origin. And of
Right.
course, there have been debates within the African American community about who's really Black and who isn't.
Yeah. Yeah. All that sort of thing.
You, I'm just declaring that I regard those boundaries to be rather flexible, and I can live with that. But the purists don't. So if you'll run into some even scholars who have a very purist attitude about who can claim to be Appalachian. I'm saying I'm not one of those people.
Interesting. Yeah. Growing up, my family always believed we were part Native American. And then when I got older, I was starting to like be able to rationalize and think about things. I was like, I don't look Native American, Dad. And he's like, I promise we're part Native American. I was like, do you see me? I made everybody take one of those. What is it? A 23andMe test or the ancestry?
DNA.
Yeah. 0% anything but European. I was like,
yeah. I read somewhere that a large fraction American people claim some Native American. Most of us, if we really did the genetic testing or whatever, would not show that. And my family claimed some Native, and the proof is always that at least one member of the family looked a little that way.
Yeah, that's what it was.
And I know that my mother's skin was a little darker than most white people, and but she, I know our ancestry. There were no Native Americans in there. I know I had a great aunt who was a Cherokee, but I'm not descended from her.
Yeah.
She's the one when her husband hit her with a what do you call it? A whip. She shot him dead, and and nobody said a word about it because in Appalachian culture, some people needed kilt. They needed to be killed. He was one that needed to be killed, and she did it, and she got away with it.
Good Lord.
My grandfather shot Red Bill Maloney, who was probably kin to us, and he was never taken to court because Red Bill deserved it. He tried to rob my grandfather.
You can't rob people. Maybe you deserve it.
Right.
Okay, so what else do I have here?